Got it. Got it. And it doesn't look particularly well. Hello. Hi, everyone out there. We're just getting all of our ducks in a row here as we approach 1 o'clock and the start of our watch party. So for now, sit tight for a minute or two. Hello. And I need to, hi, everyone out there. We're just getting all of our ducks in a row here. And really appreciate you taking the time to join us for what will hopefully be a fun opportunity to watch birds together on this beautiful, sunny upstate New York afternoon. We've got a lot of people signing into the chat right now, which is great. Today's event is as much about listening to us as it is hearing about your experiences with birds as well, and experiencing the birds on the camera together. And so I should start out by saying welcome to the BirdCam's Bird Feeder Watch Party, which is featuring Birds Canada and Project FeederWatch today. So thanks everybody for showing up. My name is Charles Eldermeyer, and I'm the project leader for BirdCams at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And I'm excited to be bird watching today with Carrie Wilcox from Birds Canada and Emma Gregg from Project FeederWatch. We'll be chatting about the birds we're seeing on screen, as well as answering questions from chat and hearing about your experiences too. Behind the scenes, Ben Walters and Catherine Welch will be working to interact with you in chat as well. So thanks for coming. And now let's hear from both our expert guests and get watching some birds together. So Carrie, I wonder if you might be able to say a few words about Birds Canada, what you do up there, and why you're excited to be here today.
Hi, I'm really excited to be here today. Project FeederWatch actually began as the Ontario Bird Feeder Survey in the 1970s. And then the Long Point Bird Observatory joined with Cornell 10 years later, and Project FeederWatch is launched. So this is really a great partnership between Cornell and Birds Canada. And I've been with Birds Canada for about 20 years now. I started off as a student studying ducks and duck diets here at Long Point, because it's really a fantastic stopover area for ducks during their migration. And later I joined Project FeederWatch, which is a whole new world for me. I'd never studied songbirds before, so I've learned so much over the years, and I'm still learning. And I'm definitely not an expert, but I have lots of experts in my office to help me with all these your tricky questions. And
hello. Hi, everyone out there. We're just getting all of our ducks in a row here. Sounds like audio's coming through from somewhere. Start of our watch party. So for now, sit tight for a minute or two. Sorry about that. My computer's going a little crazy over here. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No problem at all. So anyways, I'm excited to be here and excited to see all the birds at the feeder. My goodness, so many goldfinches.
Yeah, and I think goldfinches are probably a bird that Emma knows well as well, because this is just several miles probably from where you are, right, Emma? Do you want to tell us a little bit about you and Project FeederWatch from your angle?
Yeah, I do know the goldfinch, a classic feeder bird. So my name's Emma, and I've been managing FeederWatch in the US for about 10 years at the Lab of O, and it's a great program. I've learned a lot in this time, and gosh, I don't know what else to say. I'm watching these birds and trying to identify all the birds on the camera, so it's all I can think about right now.
That really brings us right up to speed, I think, because there's actually a surprising amount of activity as the weather kind of bears down on Ithaca right now. And I didn't mention this at the top, but this feeder site is located right outside the Cornell Lab of Ornithology in Sapsucker Woods. So everybody out there in the audience, feel free to chime in with the birds you're seeing on camera. We're going to be sharing what we're seeing, which should be the same things, and sharing some things that we, whatever, think, don't like about what we're seeing on screen. One interesting thing that I've always found about goldfinches is that they don't usually show up as single birds. And from both of your experience, kind of working with observations from people all over North America, is that the kind of thing that holds up in what people are seeing in when they're doing FeederWatch?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Large flock sizes of goldfinches are pretty common. They're a very social bird, kind of like their relative, the pine siskin, right? Which is like notorious for coming and showing up in big groups. So yeah, little goldies like to
That's a
be
good
with their
point.
friends.
Yeah, and then we have a single bird there
What?
with a nice
What? A
tufts.
single? Ah,
Yeah, and not a but
calling
there's
me a liar already.
no, not a goldfinch, but a little gray fellow. And
Oh, okay. Well, there
the,
is only one goldfinch right now, so
that's
those
true.
goldfinch, the second you say something about a bird species or whatever, they just prove you wrong. That's what I
Well, and
find.
these little gray guys that we're seeing here, these are tufted titmice. Um,
I'm
and
super excited to see tufted titmice because they're not very common in my area. I had one showing up at my feeders a few years ago, and it's now disappeared. But
oh
they're
wow,
they're really exciting.
so they're quite common here. Is there are there data from observers that have participated in FeederWatch that give us a sense of where titmice are more common? Because it sounds like they're not common right where you are, right, Carrie?
Nope, they're more of a southern bird, and they are becoming a little bit more common right at the border of Canada and the U.S. and into Ontario and Quebec, but they're really still a very exciting bird.
For sure. And I see that there's some people in the chat, Mojave Bird Life's talking about having oak titmice out there in the desert. Somebody else saw their first saw their first tufted titmouse just this season in Eastern Ontario. First one. I'm presuming ever. We have some first graders loving the titmice, and that they don't see them too often in Des Moines. There's a couple people asking to make sure we try and ID birds. So if we're chatting about the birds, and we'll do our best to in the middle of chat and call out what we see. And there are a couple of Canada geese on the pond in the background there. Ooh, Emma,
Okay, what's that? What's that? I don't know.
Yeah.
Downy Harry. Ah, too quick. That beak looks pretty long. I'm going with Harry.
How about you, Carrie?
Yeah, I'm going with Harry too. That bill was really robust.
Yeah, so that is a very stout looking woodpecker right there. And Harry Woodpecker, it definitely looks like to me as well. So we got another titmouse joining the party. Any other tips for people looking to kind of dial in their hairy versus downy IDs?
If the bill looks very dainty and the bird looks dainty over well, it's most likely a downy woodpecker. If you see them side by side, it's so obvious, but it doesn't happen very often. Although,
there you go.
There you go right now.
There they go. Yeah.
So we've got a male hairy woodpecker. You can see that red spot on the back of his head up on the seed cylinder in the upper left, and down poking around the suet, you can see a much smaller little guy down there, right? The downy, and it looks like it's a female. I don't see any red on its head. These guys are pretty common, right? As far as across your feeder watchers, at least in the east, or
yeah, they're all. Oh, go ahead, Carrie.
They always are within the top 2 or 3 birds in Canada, so they're very common in Canada.
Yeah, same for in the U.S. Very common all across the country.
And we have a nice male downy woodpecker on there in the tray. Ooh, and a nice physical interaction there between the titmouse and the goldfinch on the tube feeder in the back. You guys actually, is there something new that's happened in the last few years where you're actually taking data now on interactions at the feeder? Is that still happening?
It is still happening, yeah. And it's just that these behavioral interactions that people can now record with their FeederWatch observations give us just a huge new, oh, there's something.
Oh.
See, I can't concentrate while I'm watching this thing. Anyway, yeah, we're getting a lot of good behavioral interaction data from feeder watchers, and just you can answer all kinds of cool questions. Okay, wait, can we quiz the chat? What is that bird before
Yeah,
we say what they are?
I think that'd
Okay.
be great. So we have a bird sitting on the front of the tray feeder. Looks a little different than all the birds that have been coming in over the last couple minutes, like that titmouse in the back. If you had to give that bird a name, what might it be? The most descriptive name you might think of, even one
Oh,
might
look at
suggest.
these folks. They know
Yeah,
it. They already
yeah.
got it. I didn't
So we
need
see a
to.
lot of people, red-winged blackbird coming up in the chat. Very good. Possibly one of the best named birds. And just like, what a fun bird, especially in the spring.
Yeah, but where are those red wings? I don't see any red wings.
Well, that is a great question. Anybody want to, have people encountered a red-winged blackbird where they couldn't see the red? Any ideas why out there in the audience? Well, yeah. So tricolored is an interesting. So tricolored blackbirds are a bird, a different bird, but I've often thought that it could be a name of red-winged blackbirds as well. Um, do you want to spill the beans there, Emma, since you brought it up?
Yeah, I guess I should. Well, the red is still there, I think, but it's just covered up by these black feathers in the winter because they don't need to be showing off so much when they're not, excuse me, defending their little marshy territories against other male redwings. So,
Yeah.
anyway, cool switch from the winter to the springtime plumage.
Yeah, and that is something that in my reading they can control the amount of red they want to show. So red-winged blackbirds, the males are known to try and mate with as many females as they can. And when they're going into another male's territory, they'll cover those up and try and sneak around so as not to draw the attention of the male on territory. So it's a pretty cool feature of a bird that, you think of them as being so bright and in your face, but they can actually, just like that bird, not be so aggro all the time. And Carrie, you must get those birds up where you are quite a bit as
I
well.
get huge flocks, especially in the fall. I'll look out in my backyard and it is like solid red-winged blackbirds.
Pretty amazing. And this time of year, they get up into big flocks with a bunch of other blackbirds, different species, and travel around and find food, which is just another neat thing that blackbirds do. They can be just super aggressive during the breeding season, and then all of a sudden they're good friends all winter long. So yeah, we got a couple questions here in the chat about where red-winged blackbirds nest. Cattails, ditches, wet areas. Yeah, for sure. Oh, so here's something that I don't know how often this interferes with you guys being able to get data from FeederWatch. Maeve writes that here in northern Vermont, we haven't put out our feeders yet because black bears haven't denned up yet. Is this something you hear about or that impacts your data collection for FeederWatch?
It does seem to, folks. If you have bears around, we definitely would recommend, if you haven't already taken down your feeders, it's good to, because you don't want them to habituate to coming around homes and getting bird seed. But so yeah, a lot of folks don't do feeder watch while the bears are out, but you can actually feeder watch without having your feeders out. So this is one more opportunity to remind people that you don't need bird feeders to be participating in feeder watch. And actually, it's really super, super valuable to submit data about following the feeder watch protocol, but without feeders actually present, because then we can get a better idea of how bird communities change depending on whether or not you have bird feeders out.
Oh, that's a really interesting thing that, I guess all the feeder watch. So maybe if you give like the 5 sentence description for anybody that might be new both to the broadcast and to feeder watch, like what is Project Feeder Watch?
Yeah.
We've mentioned it probably 15 times, but I just realized we haven't said anything about it. And to everybody in the audience, you're actually hearing from Carrie Wilcox and Emma Gregg, who are the leaders of Project Feeder Watch from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology and Birds Canada. So we have the actual world experts on FeederWatch with us here today. So, but we should do them a solid and let them find out what FeederWatch is.
Yeah, well, it's just a winter bird counting program that at the beginning, Carrie was sort of talking about the origin of the program coming from Canada in the 70s and then kind of morphing a little bit when it joined up with the lab in the 80s. And it's just you count birds following a standard protocol between the months of November and April and send in that data to the website. And then we, end up with this huge, amazing data set of bird distribution and abundance across Canada and the US. I don't know, there's probably more details I should say, Carrie, but I'm forgetting.
Well, this is the 37th year, so we have this amazing data set. We can see which birds are doing well and which ones might need some conservation attention. FeederWatch just keeps getting better with every year.
Yeah, that's a good detail. 37 years. Yeah, it's amazing.
And I think it's also important for people to realize they can still join FeederWatch if you're interested in counting birds with or without feeders, as we just learned. You can still join FeederWatch today. What's the latest somebody could conceivably join FeederWatch within a FeederWatch season? Obviously, the earlier the better, but is there a cutoff for when people could join or give a gift of joining?
There's not really a cutoff. The counting will end at the end of April 30th. So, you probably wouldn't want to sign up in April because you just will only get a month of counting. But certainly right now, plenty of time. Now's the time to do it. So we encourage it.
Awesome. And sort of following up on that, someone asking about where can they find the actual protocol for reporting? And it looks like the link just got shared, but if one were to join FeederWatch, presumably that might be part of the process.
Yes.
Yeah. Just we have a page called Detailed Instructions, and just go to that on the feederwatch.org site, and it has everything you need to. Any questions you might have about the protocol are in there.
So there's an awesome little downy woodpecker on screen for me right now. And when she hopped over onto the suet feeder and she's moving around it now, ooh,
there's a good one.
Yeah. Anybody out there? This is a bird that might seem to be slightly misnomered, but often we're able to see its namesake. So yeah, anybody in chat want to throw out who this is and maybe what sex the bird is even? Sapsucker's a good guess. The sapsuckers around us have all migrated at this point. Red-bellied woodpecker, that's right.
Yeah.
And Christina yelped out loud in her office, just like I did. And the fun thing is that red belly can be hard to see, but on our cameras, you can often get a good view of it. And it's a female because that neon mohawk doesn't quite connect from the mullet in the back to the bangs in the front.
I love the size comparison shot right now. You can see how much bigger it is than the downy woodpecker.
Yeah, that is just spectacular. And look at just the intricate black-white patterns on their back, on their wings. Just pretty cool.
Yeah, they're so beautiful, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, literally, it's breathtaking every time one of these birds arrives at my feeder here at home. We have the same suet feeder at home, which all the feeders on here are provided by Wild Birds Unlimited. I've had a couple questions about the seeds. This is all like a no mess seed mix because we feed so much at the lab. We don't want to deal with the detritus of the shells of sesame seeds. Geez, I always want to say that. Of sunflower seeds. And so that's why you don't see the typical black that you see of sunflower seeds all over the place here. There's a seed cylinder in the upper left, and then there's a bark butter cylinder inside that kind of cast ceramic kind of fake looking log on the left side. And then there's naturally nuts suet in the suet cake. Oh, got a peanut.
That was cute.
That was cute. But what should people, how could people potentially learn about what they might want to be feeding birds? Do you
Oh,
guys have
well,
different resources for that?
yeah, we have that common feeder bird tool on the FeederWatch website, which is nice because you can sort of choose your location and what you put out, and then you might see it'll show you what birds you're likely to find. Or you can go the other direction and select a bird species that you want to attract, and it'll tell you where you have to live in order to do that and what foods and feeder types they prefer.
Is there any species that either of you or the audience, if you want to chime in, is there any bird that you're hoping to get at your feeders, or that you've put out special stuff to try and get to come to your feeders, and have you had any success with that?
Bird I most want to have come to my feeders is a pileated woodpecker. I can hear them in the woods beside me. I've got something like 3 suet feeders out there. I've got peanut feeders. I've, I've got a couple of red belly woodpeckers. I've got hairy woodpeckers. So there's no reason for the pileated to not come. So I have my fingers crossed. That's the one I want to show up.
And that's a male hairy woodpecker there on the seed cylinder. How about you, Emma? Any attempts, or maybe it's not even at your feeder, but a bird that you've gone out to try and go see because it like caught your imagination?
I would say, well, the ones that I kind of look forward to seeing the most in the winter are common red poles. I just think those guys are such cool birds. Their little rosy bellies and showing up in those big flocks. And they just remind me kind of a little bugs, the way they zoom around, and it's so teeny, and yet they live in such cold weather. I just can't even wrap my head around it. So I love it when red poles show up.
That's great. Yeah, and there's something special when we do get those on the Ontario Feeder Watch cams. So this is just one of 3 feeder cams that we run in the bird cams program. We have another one up in Northern Ontario that gets a lot of cool boreal specialties. We were potentially going to have that camera up today, but it's a little blustery, and it seems like the birds are not as common as might be helpful for a watch party. Um, but love seeing red poles up there. Um, Lots of people in the chat talking about um, some bluebirds, pileatids, with some suggestions maybe for you to follow up on at
Oh,
some
good.
point, Gary. Make sure you get the big suet feeder. Move some wood logs to your feeder area. That's actually a great point by Olga. We have some old dead chunks of wood that are literally sitting on the ground that pileatids have come in and started eating. And it's, I mean, they're going for the carpenter ants probably inside it. So that's a great
That's a great idea.
sort of
Yeah.
like natural food. Um, let's see here. Lots of people talking about yeah, red poles, purple finches. Um, that's cool. Rosy finch. So yeah, it's cool to hear about what people are hoping to see, because in a way, bird feeding is a little bit like fishing. You're basically putting out something that could be attractive, and then you get to reap the benefit of watching. Um, let's see here. Oh, a question about the empty feeder on screen. That's normally full of peanuts, but once the blue jays find them and the titmice, they tend to go within 20 to 45 minutes.
I was watching the cam this morning, and that was full of peanuts, and the blue jays were coming in constantly and taking the peanuts, so they didn't last.
They never do. We have a question here. Can I join FeederWatch even if I don't live in the US or Canada?
Oh, the bird lists are very much designed at the moment for US and Canada, so don't really have a good infrastructure for having folks outside of that yet, but it's something we've talked about a lot. Like, it would be great to be able to do FeederWatch in Mexico and expand the bird lists down there. So we're thinking about it and figuring out how to geographically expand. But for now, it's a US and Canada only program.
And then there were, hey, Melissa, I see your question about the pond cam, and I will hopefully get to it in a little bit as we move maybe away from some feeder stuff, but I've seen it come up a couple times. Just want to let you know. So there's oh, where was I going now? Well, so in talking about it being in different places. Right now, it's only in Canada and the US, with some thoughts of expanding a little bit beyond that. And there is also still the opportunity to count birds globally using something like eBird. Um, but one thing that's come up, I've seen a few different times is like, well, wait, how do you know how many birds are coming to the feeder? How many are you counting? How do you count? So I wonder if there were like a sort of a quick overview to help people understand how counting even works in Project FeederWatch according to the protocol.
Well, everybody has to count the exact same way on Project FeederWatch. So we ask you to count the highest number of each species that you see at a single time. So what I like to do is keep a tally sheet out in front of my window, and when I'm watching, if there's a group of, say, 6 goldfinches, I write that down, and 2 chickadees, write that down, and then during my lunch, I come back and watch my feeders, and I just cross out the highest number that I saw in the morning if I'm seeing 8 goldfinches then at lunch. So this is the way you do it over your 2-day count period. So at the end of the 2 days, you just have the highest number of each species that you saw at a single time. You're not adding them together. It's just the highest at one. Did I miss anything, Emma?
Got it. And what would I say about that? I guess just to emphasize that the goal of this protocol is just to try not to count the same bird multiple times. So we're trying to have a conservative estimate of the number of individuals of each species that you have around your home. But yeah, I think you covered it, Carrie.
Well, by following this protocol, this makes sure that we treat all species the same too. So if you have a male red-bellied woodpecker and later a female, but you don't see them at the same time, you only saw one at a single time at your feeder, you're only counting 1, even though you know there's 2 there. It's just for us to compare the trend analysis, we have to treat all species the same.
Yes.
And I think, it seems like, sometimes people get hung up on, well, you're not like counting, you're not like sharing all the information that you have. But in this case, it's about being able to compare doing it the same way over time, right? It's not so much that you need to count every single bird and like you said, it's a conservative estimate. And you can then use those if those conservative estimates are done the same way across 37 years, across tens of thousands of participants, then you can compare them in a way that you couldn't if everybody was counting differently.
And
that's right.
Don't expect you to sit there for the whole 2 days and watch your feeders. Although some people it seems like they do.
Well, it's interesting because, yeah, sorry, go ahead. Didn't mean to interrupt you.
That's okay. I was going to say you could just count for a short time while you're having your coffee in the morning, and then another short time while you're doing your lunch, and then it's an estimate of how much time you spent over the 2 days.
And that's one reason why eBird and Project FeederWatch are 2 different projects with 2 different data collection protocols, and they don't combine into one way to analyze data. They're 2 different ways of going about understanding birds. Would that be, because there's been a couple questions in chat about that too.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it, Charles. And the data are all sort of housed in the same place in a way, and any researcher could access both, but you wouldn't ever blend them together because the way the data are collected is different.
That's a great point. I just want to touch on, there's a couple questions about the pond. Are there wood ducks that visit or nest? Yes. I just saw a wood duck on the pond this week, a single male. And there's been some hooded mergansers out there. Sometimes we get ringneck ducks in the spring, some other birds. And we've had Cooper's hawks land literally on the tray going after birds before. Let's see here. Honestly, sometimes I really like these quiet parts of the feeder too. You can kind of like hear the wind.
And the raindrops. Yeah.
Yeah. And I really encourage people, if you have lots of specific questions for FeederWatch, we can talk through some of them here live, but there's some really great resources you'll be able to consult over and over again to make sure you're getting it right. And where should people go for that kind of information about, like, I don't know, FAQs and what the project does?
Yeah, that detailed instruction link, I think that someone put up earlier in the chat, that is a good place. And once you're on the FeederWatch website, you can kind of look at the tabs, the navigation tabs, and whatever they're called up at the top, and figure out if you want to look at FAQs or tips for bird feeding or whatever you want. There's all kinds of info there.
And I do need to point out the Ontario feeder cam, which is in Manitowage, is in Tammy and Ben Hachet's backyard. And Tammy's actually in the chat right now. I've seen her come through a couple times. It was just a pause. I just wanted to give a shout out to Tammy. She does an amazing job taking care of that feeding station. And, tens to hundreds of thousands of people watch it every year when we have it up for the winter. So thank you so much, Tammy. We had actually thought about potentially featuring the cam today, but it seemed a little blustery and the birds were few and far between right now this afternoon. But lots of cool birds there, and also interesting, some of the same birds in both places. So what would be like some of the more widespread species of birds that you guys get reported to you in FeederWatch? Like, if you think about across the whole area that FeederWatch encompasses, are there species that are basically everywhere? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Tammy gets a lot of species that I never get at my feeders. Like any of the evening grosbeaks, I've never had. They're more boreal northern birds. And she gets Canada jays too, which is really awesome. Another boreal specialist that would be almost worth a road trip to go to go see.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those are just a couple of examples of ones. And out in BC, they get Stellar's jays, which are strictly in BC.
And so those would be almost like your specialty type birds, where like they're only really being seen in a small proportion of your feeder watcher sites, right? What would be the flip side? What's a bird that you find you said a couple times about some common birds, but what are the birds you think would be most commonly or most frequently counted on a feeder watch, like a generic feeder watch counter?
I think that if you just tally up all of the sightings of all the birds in FeederWatch, I'm pretty sure that it's the dark-eyed junco that comes out on top. Is that true? I feel like that's true for both US and Canada.
In Canada, it's the black-capped chickadee that's on top.
Oh, chickadee's
dark-eyed junco is number 2.
2, okay. I think dark-eyed junco wins in the US, but maybe black-capped chickadee, they might be number 2 in the US. I can't quite remember who's number 2, but anyway, juncos are all over the place. But I guess they're kind of cool because even though they're everywhere, they're not the same everywhere that you go. So there are what are they called? Slate-colored dark-eyed juncos in the east, and then the Oregon-style junco in the west, which has sort of more brown colors on it. So that there's a crazy little ones down in the southwest with yellow eyes. They're just so widespread that they've diversified a little bit. So that, I don't know. Anyway, that's kind of a cool species, but we haven't seen any on the feeders. I'm surprised.
Yeah, I find that they're, at least at this feeding station, they're fairly infrequently on the feeder. They're more often on the ground.
Yeah,
so
that's right. Yeah.
Probably, we've had a couple questions about the feeder. So you can see there's a goldfinch on the tube feeder, male hairy woodpecker on the suet right now, and a little, I think, female downy up on the seed cylinder. So this platform's about probably 5 to 5.5 feet off the ground. And so, like, I'm a towering 5'6", and for me to get some of these hanging feeders off their hooks can be fairly challenging for me to reach. So it's kind of high off the ground. There are big, probably 2 or 3 foot long baffles to try and keep raccoons and squirrels off the poles. And then, yeah, all the feeders are provided by Wild Birds Unlimited, as well as the food. But so some of the species you might find more commonly on the ground and maybe on a platform that was a little bit closer to the ground, like juncos and maybe like white-throated sparrows and that kind of thing. I feel like we rarely get them on the platform here.
I just saw a question that asks, what are the strongest or most interesting trends you've seen after 37 years of FeederWatch? Boy, that's a tough one to choose. There are so many different things that come out of the FeederWatch data. I would say, well, a favorite is the Anna's hummingbird range expansion in winter. I feel like that is such a cool pattern to be able to see, just because you can't even, that's hard to imagine a little hummingbird staying in a snowy British Columbia all winter long. But some of these little Annas do that now, and a lot more than they used to. Um, but I don't know. Do you have trends that you especially love, Carrie, from the FeederWatch data?
Well, not especially love, but one trend that
Okay.
I was thinking of was the increase in sharp-shinned and Cooper's hawks. They have really increased in Project FeederWatch, and in Canada, birds of prey have increased something like 110% since the 70s because DDT was banned. So we're seeing that increase on FeederWatch, and more people are reporting Cooper's hawks and sharp-shinned hawks. So it's kind of a great way of seeing the birds' response to conservation efforts. And they've also discovered feeders as a food source.
Yeah, they have.
Yeah,
not one of the more popular trends, though, I don't think.
Yeah, the bird feeders become feeders for birds in a much different way when you think about that. And we've had a couple questions in the chat about raptors and things at the bird feeders here. And we've had a screech owl actually capture a flying squirrel on the platform in the middle of the night once. We've had
that clip.
got a red-tailed hawk capture a mink that was in the garden beneath the feeder, and the mink was probably hunting, something that was attracted to the bird feed beneath it. And then lots of Cooper's hawks, especially, and some sharpshin, sometimes right on the feeder, sometimes like banging their way through the feeder because they're just, hell bent on chasing after something. And then you can kind of make it out behind the tube feeder, but there's a sort of a wooden post back there that has been a popular spot for raptors to land. It's part of the fence, and we've had a great horned owl perch on that for a while as well. So I've always found that, even during the night, my guess is that probably small mammals are eating the waste seed on the ground, and that attracts things like nighttime avian predators like owls. We still have
cardinals is another really great expansion story. They've moved way north since FeederWatch began. Even when I moved into my house and started feeding birds 20 years ago, there were no cardinal hens. And now we're seeing them regularly. So that's a really fun one. And they're one of the ones that have benefited from suburban areas and people planting trees and shrubs and putting up feeders. And so winters are just more hospitable to them.
And what a cool bird to get more of. I mean, yeah. People lament sometimes the fact that the birds go away in the winter, but we probably have some of the most colorful winter birds, at least in the, Northeast, with cardinals and blue jays. And, it's just sort of, it's pretty. Let's see here. Talking about the hairy woodpecker looking chunky. Well, today's the kind of day when, if you're a bird, you're probably going to look chunky. You kind of, speaking of a chunky bird, anybody have a thought about this small-headed, broad-shouldered, long-tailed gobbler on the platform?
I think they all know it so well they're not even bothering to type it. So,
I know, right? This
oh, there they said it.
is this
Morning
a
dove.
common bird on FeederWatch for you guys?
Yes, yes, very common all over the place. They are so I this is a species that I remember thinking, oh wow, cool. When we looked at a lot of the behavioral interaction data, because what we could do with all of those behavioral interactions was rank species as like really, really tough if they win a lot of fights, or really peaceful if they lose a lot of fights or don't engage in many fights relative to their body size. And mourning doves ended up coming out really low ranking for their body size, which means that kind of that saying, peaceful as a dove, it was like, oh, it's true. They really are very peaceful birds. So if a chickadee came and wanted to scare it off right now, it might be able to.
And thinking back to the birds being puffy, it's a relatively raw day in Sapsucker Woods. It's probably 33 or 34 with a 15-mile-an-hour wind and rain coming down. And they're trying to stay warm. And so are there any things that you guys have enjoyed learning about when it comes to how birds are able to survive winters like this? You think about a bird like a chickadee that weighs as much as a couple of nickels, in your hand, right? They're out there when it's -30 at Tammy's feeders up there in Manitowoc, seemingly unbothered, but I would say chunkier looking, puffier looking than they often look. And I don't know if there's some winter adaptations that you guys could share with the audience.
Chickadees have lots of adaptations to surviving in cold weather. Well, they puff up their feathers, and those little air pockets between the feathers keep their body warm. So that's one of the things they do. And at night, they put their little bodies into crevices or into little holes in trees and go into like a regulated hypothermia, which saves energy at night. And they eat tons of food, like almost 10% of their body weight, so that they have lots of energy to get through the night as well. And there's so many things. They cache their food to find it later when, like during snowstorms, when food isn't as accessible. And their brain, the hippocampus, the part of their brain where it stores memory, actually grows 30% in their northern climates in the fall, so that they can remember where they've cached their food. Chickadees are just amazing little birds.
I couldn't agree with you more. They're probably one of my favorites. And as some people noted, we just had a male cardinal come in for just a split couple of seconds there. And so a lot of the things that the chickadees do, right? Like things like puffed up. You think about how you wear a puffy coat when you're cold. They're kind of built. They have a built-in puffy coat. But then the chickadees have evolved all these other really cool adaptations to make the most of trying to survive in what can be a pretty inhospitable environment. We got a question here. Is that a Gila or a red-bellied woodpecker?
On the camera right now?
Yeah.
Oh, red-bellied.
Yeah. So we don't have Gilas up here, but it is like, so even though you can think of them all as being woodpeckers, broadly, some of them look pretty similar, right? Like we're really not, we notice the downies and hairies right away. But are there other woodpeckers or tricky to ID birds that look pretty similar to one another that feeder watchers find challenging?
Trying to think, maybe distinguishing flickers from red-bellied woodpeckers. They kind of have a similar shape to their and color tones. Those ones, I feel like behavior is actually kind of a cool way to tell them apart, because flickers will often eat off of the ground, which I always think is kind of crazy because you don't think of woodpeckers as ground feeders, but flickers will be on your yard hanging out with the robins and looking for bugs, even while all the other woodpeckers are banging on the dead trees in your backyard.
That's a great point. There's a few people in the chat. Carolina versus black-capped chickadee was one. Purple and house finches.
Yeah,
Yeah,
those
I
are
can
some
imagine.
tricky ones.
Yeah. We have a tricky bird page on the FeederWatch website. It's a great one to look at for house finches and purple finches. It's got a great description for how to tell them apart. Purple finches are more like a raspberry color than a house finch, but house finches are super variable too, the male house finches. So they are really tricky.
Yeah, and the Carolina blackcap puzzle. Whew, I mean, I think in my mind, the best way to distinguish those two species is to look at their range maps and look at where you are in relation to their range maps, because where the two species do overlap, there's this little narrow hybrid zone, and they actually can mate with one another and hybridize. So it can be extremely difficult to distinguish them if you do live in a place where the two species overlap. But most people don't. Most people either live where there are Carolina chickadees or live where there are black-capped chickadees. So I think geography is one of the places to start with those guys.
That's also a good way to get the Gila woodpecker out of the discussion with the red-bellied woodpecker, especially here in upstate New York. Range maps are your friend for a lot of these.
Right.
It's a great point. Let's see. Somebody's surprised not to see some nuthatches. Matthew Hunt, surprised not to see nuthatches right now on the feeders. How common are nuthatches reported in FeederWatch? Is that a common bird?
Yeah, they're pretty
White-breasted nuthatches are very, very common. Red-breasted ones vary from year to year. So some years they're common and some years they're not. They're one of the ones that respond to seed and cone crops up north. But yeah. White-breasted, I think, are in the top 10.
Yeah.
And usually people only have one or two at their feeders because they defend such big territories. And so usually just one or two at a feeder.
And, as we look at these goldfinches munching away right on the platform, that's a great view of a goldfinch kind of like manhandling a seed. If you imagine just eating with only your face, right? Not using your hands at all. These finches are just expert at that. But then you notice the chickadees and the titmice and even the nuthatches, sometimes the woodpeckers, they'll grab something and fly off with it. Maybe not even to cache it or hide it, but because they can't just sit there and eat it like these goldfinches do, right? Like what's sort of the, can you think of anything that like the most odd kind of interaction between a bird that you've been watching and a piece of food? Like, like there's you think about us, you've seen somebody eat like a giant hot dog or something and stuff's all squirting out the side, right? Have you seen birds do something funny at a feeder? This is for the audience as well. Like, have you seen birds doing something funny while they're eating that just kind of like made you laugh, made you realize that nature is not all grace, or just you found it astounding they were able to do it in the first place, to eat that thing, whatever it was?
Well, I used to have a pet ringneck dove, those white doves that are kind of like a mourning dove. And if I drew a little black oval on a piece of paper and set it in front of him, he would try to pick it up for a really long time because he thought, oh, it's a sunflower seed. Oh, the poor darling. He would really, really give it his best effort. I realize that's not exactly what you were asking for, but God, it popped into my head, and I used to love that bird so much.
Oh, I love it. That's hilarious. And I do want to point out there was just a beautiful shot of a hairy woodpecker and a downy woodpecker on screen at the same time, pointed the same direction. And it was like is like having a half-size version of the other one, along with these goldfinches over on the tube feeder. How about you, Carrie? Any interesting foraging observations that you've had in your life?
Mm, Not, not that I can think of. One of my interesting interactions, I had a red-headed woodpecker show up for just a short time during migration. And it's about the same size as the red-bellied woodpeckers, but wow, was it aggressive. It would chase everyone away and even follow them off into the woods, chasing them away. And
Oh my goodness,
I was just really shocked by how aggressive they were. Not that I wouldn't mind if it stayed at my feeder, but
that's hilarious.
it
Well,
was it was shocking.
and some people in the
Wow.
chat are talking about seeing hawks hork down chunks of food that you'd never think they could swallow.
Oh,
Um, Watching, bathing birds like geese doing somersaults in the water. Watching a blue jay get 21 sunflower seeds in before taking off.
that's
Um,
amazing. I've seen them gobble huge amounts of food.
Watching Megan writes about the stellar jays trying all the peanuts one by one before selecting, just the right peanut to fly off with. Even on Tammy's feeder and to a certain degree on this feeder that we have on screen, watching the blue jays try and fit more than one peanut into their bill at a time. That's a pretty funny thing to watch to me. Oh, and somebody pointed out we have a male. There's been a male house finch and a female house finch that have been over on the
Oh,
tube
yeah.
feeder off and on. Thank you for pointing that out. The streakier brown ones is the female, and the male was the reddish one. Sorry about that.
I was going to say, I think the chipmunk at my feeder is the most impressive for stuffing the amount of food in his mouth at one time.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, they have amazing pouches. But blue jays also have some adaptations, right, for being able to carry all those seeds.
Yes, they have expandable gullet. Is that what it's called for?
Yeah, I think
For
gullet is what I.
carrying seeds.
It's pretty incredible that they can stuff that much in there and still fly away. And I have to say, like seeing a titmouse grab a peanut and fly away with it, like a peanut in the shell, because it's so big relative to the front of that bird, is also, I
Yeah.
think, a pretty funny sighting. People talking about robins trying to carry too many or many worms at one time. Oh, crows. That's an interesting observation here. I notice no crows are present. Why? Crows are routinely at my feeders. Is there anything that FeederWatch data has helped us understand about like where crows like to be or how commonly they're seen at feeders?
It doesn't seem like a lot of people report crows on Project FeederWatch in my that I've noticed.
I cannot really remember. And I'm just going to look at the darn FeederWatch graphs right now to have a peek. Well, it looks like crows are reported at, it kind of depends on where you live, but 30 to 40% of FeederWatch sites report crows at least once throughout the FeederWatch season.
I've never had one at my feeder.
Oh, no. Okay. Yeah, maybe I guess it the farther north you go, the less common they seem to be. And so maybe that's part of it. I know
Though
we have them in our
definitely,
yard. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and Tammy just piped up in chat, and I was going to say this. The crows are definitely big fans of the feeder platform there in Manitowaj, but it might have something to do with just the quality of the great food that are out there. And there have been still a couple of house finches, females at the feeders. There's one in the upper right of the tube feeder right now that you can see the goldfinches kind of have a bright white contrasty band on their wings surrounded by darker feathers where when we're looking at the back of them. That bird in the upper right doesn't have that. And if she were to turn around, you'd see streaks kind of on her chest. She was just perched on the tray feeder, but I didn't want to interrupt. So yeah, crows are an interesting one because they're big, right? And but I don't think I've ever had them at my feeders in my backyard, even though I've seen flocks of 750 fly over. Um, and I don't know if there's also something to do with hunting, maybe. If you live in an area where they were hunted in the past, as they have been, that could also play into it as well. Let's see here.
I remember doing some field work in the desert in Arizona. And at that field site, it's at a place called Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument. And there are ravens that come to our campsite and will rob our camp if we leave anything out. And I remember coming back one day from camp, from being out, and we had left out this box of granola bars. So they had gotten into the granola bars and they were all gone. The ravens were gone, the granola bars were gone. But as I walked up to camp, I saw this little pile of dust with like a few little flowers placed on top of the dust. And underneath this dust pile, I'm not kidding, gently placed little twinky flowers was a granola bar. So that raven had taken it 20 feet from camp and buried it and carefully concealed it. I thought, you little devil. But so I got one back. Man, they are smart cookies.
That is too funny. Well, so one thing I like to do is just like when we're taking a coffee break here at home, if I'm working from home, my wife works remotely as well, and we'll have a joint coffee break in the afternoon. And that's when I'll put out the peanuts on our feeder. And we have a group of at least 6 blue jays that are usually there pretty quick. And there's such a frenzy to get the peanuts, not really to eat them, but to get them, hide them for later. And so you can sit at the window and just like look out the window and they'll grab it. And sometimes they'll only fly like 15 feet away, like over to where the Rose of Sharon is. And they're like, look around, walk over, like innocuously put it on the ground, look around, dig in the ground a little bit, tap it in there. And then like invariably they look, find a leaf, put it on top.
Yeah.
And then they're right back to the feeder to go grab another one. And then we've seen them come back, a half hour later and take it and move it someplace else. So they're really making all these like split second decisions, it feels like, based upon the number of other birds there, probably how hungry they are. It's kind of a really cool behavior to watch. So I encourage everybody out there, if you do have birds that you see taking seeds or nuts away, you can sometimes position yourself at the right window where you see them flying away to and just kind of see what they do with it. I don't know if anybody out in the chat world there has seen any birds doing that in their yards. It would be great to hear about it if you want to share. And yes, those are Canada geese swimming around back there on the pond. That's here at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology in Ithaca, New York. We are just about at the top of the hour. I've been having an incredible time talking with Carrie Wilcox and Emma Gregg of Birds Canada and Project FeederWatch. I don't know if you two have anything you'd like to share before we sign off here in a couple minutes, whether about birds, FeederWatch, or just today's hour of watching birds together.
Oh, no, it's been really fun to watch these birds and chit chat. Very, very nice hour.
It has been fun. One of my favorite things about being with FeederWatch is hearing about the exciting birds that people have at their feeders. So I love being able to experience with everyone today.
Well, I know for me, like I'm in the US and we have Thanksgiving coming up this week. The Christmas holidays are just a month off. There's often a lot of family time involved in that for me and kids home from school and all that. And I love having a bird feeder there for us all to just enjoy as a shared experience while like we're home for the holidays. It's something I can sit with my mom and do, watch the feeders, share that time. And watching these cameras, if you don't have feeders or if you want to have a shared remote experience, just like we're doing right now, you can do this with your friends. You can do this with your family. It can be something you talk about and share with each other. Did you see that cool bird? So you can actually go back in time in the YouTube event by just mousing back along the little time bar at the bottom. And about 15 minutes before we went online today, there was a pileated woodpecker on that seed block in the upper left, sitting there. So you never know what's going to show up. And the cool thing is you can actually scroll back in time and actually catch some things that you missed and share them with people that you think might enjoy them too. I really appreciate Carrie and Emma spending some time today with us. I know I learned a lot and had some fun hearing stories. I appreciate Ben and Catherine being on the back end and chat. The chat has been so busy. It's been hard keeping up, and I really appreciate you guys getting all the important things in front of us. For those of you asking about the pond cam, try and send an email and I'll try and give you an update on that. Short story is it broke right at the start of the pandemic, and then we have not fixed anything about it yet. But that would be just up to the right of where this camera is. We used to have a camera that sort of like focused on different things happening in the pond. And if you like bird cams, please come on back and watch some more this winter, watch in the spring when we have birds hatching, and share it with your friends, because this is the sort of fun thing we get to do. We get to watch birds, and the cameras help us share that with other people that might not have the birds in front of them. So thank you to the audience, really engaging, seeing the chat. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Carrie. Awesome stories. And enjoy the holiday season, whether it starts for you this week or in a few weeks, everybody. Thanks for showing up, and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.